My name is Denise, and I am 44 years old. 11 days ago, I sat in a beige conference room on the third floor of a law office and listened to a man in a gray suit read my mother's final will. I had a yellow legal pad in front of me. I had written nothing on it. There was a ceramic pitcher of water on the table that no one had touched, the kind of pitcher that exists only in rooms where difficult things happen. My sister Pamela sat across from me in a coral blazer, her hands folded like she was waiting for a check she had already deposited in her mind. The attorney read the figure, the house, the accounts, the investment portfolio, the jewelry, the furniture, all of it, to Pamela. To me, a single sentence, a set of pearl earrings and a handwritten note that said, "Denise was always so capable. She will be fine." Will be. Future tense. As if she were writing a reference letter for someone she was releasing into the world. 6 years. I had given 6 years of my life to that woman. 6 years of 5 a.m. medication alarms, of insurance appeals that took 3 phone calls minimum to resolve, of driving 40 minutes each way to her cardiologist in Macon because she did not trust anyone local. 6 years of my own career halted, my savings thinned, my marriage stretched in ways that took us 2 more years to quietly repair. 6 years of my hands in her medicine cabinet, my name on her pharmacy account, my voice explaining to her doctors what had changed since the last visit because she could not always remember and I always could. But here is what Pamela did not know. I had kept records. Not because I planned to fight, not because I imagined standing in a conference room one day with an attorney present and a settlement on the table. I kept records because I am a project manager by training, and I do not know how to move through a crisis without documentation. Every appointment, every medication change, every mile, every hour, every dollar I spent out of my own pocket on her behalf. 6 years, 73 binders, 2,190 days, labeled, dated, time-stamped. I had everything. I grew up in Haddington, Georgia, population 11,400. The kind of town where the Baptist church marquee changes every Monday, and people treat the marquee like a newspaper. There was one diner, the Sunrise, that served the same breakfast plate for 30 years, and nobody complained. They had a counter with 6 stools and a booth in the back corner that the morning regulars called the conference room, because that was where the town council argued about things before the town council actually met. My father, Earl, was one of those regulars. He worked at the county water authority for 27 years. He left the house at 6:45 every morning and returned at 5:17 every evening. And in between those 2 times, he was not a complicated man. He was not warm, exactly, but he was reliable in the way that utilities are reliable. You do not think about them until they are gone. He died when I was 21, a cardiac event while mowing the lawn on a Saturday afternoon in August, and I think about that sometimes. How he lived his whole life on a schedule, and the one moment he was not on schedule was the last one. My mother, Gloria, ran the household the way some people run political campaigns. Everything was optics. The Christmas cards went out the first week of December, always, with a photo that had been taken in October specifically for the card. The flower arrangements in the foyer were changed every 2 weeks. She was on the Women's Auxiliary at First Baptist, the School Booster Committee, and the Neighborhood Association Board. Not because she loved any of those things particularly, but because those were the rooms where social capital accumulated, and my mother understood, at a cellular level, how social capital worked. She knew which families mattered and which families thought they mattered. She knew which committee assignments came with visibility and which ones were just work. She was not cruel about it. She was just precise. Pamela was 4 years younger than me and was, from the beginning, the point of the story. She was the one who won the regional debate championship at 16. The one whose photo was on the refrigerator in the magnetic frame that was meant for school pictures, but held her debate trophy photo for 3 years straight. The one whose college acceptance letter was framed. Not displayed in a frame bought for the occasion, framed with a mat, a navy blue mat. Our mother told the story of Pamela's acceptance to Vanderbilt so many times that I could recite it start to finish, with pauses in the right places. The phone call, the scream, the neighbors who came over because they heard the scream and thought something was wrong. I was accepted to Georgia State and commuted from home for 3 years. No one framed my letter. I do not think it occurred to anyone that there was a letter. I want to be honest here. I was not invisible. I was present, and I was competent, and I was trusted with things that required competence. I was the one who handled the paperwork when my father died. The death certificates, the pension claim, the bank accounts. My mother handed me the folder and said, "You know how to do this." And I did, and I did it. She trusted me with the things that required doing. She was just not interested in me beyond that. There is a difference between being trusted and being seen, and I understood the difference by the time I was 12. I do not tell you this to build a case against my mother. I tell you this because context is not an excuse, and it is not an accusation. It is just the architecture. Every house has one. In our family, the guiding principle was something like this. You do not keep score. You do what needs doing, and you trust that love accounts for everything in the end. I believed that for a long time. I want to be careful here because I do not want to flatten my mother into a single thing. She was not a cartoon. She had a full interior life that I was not always admitted to, and I accepted that. There is one memory I return to. Not often, but it is there. I was 14, and I had failed a math test. Not catastrophically, a 61, but the kind of failure that felt, at 14, like a permanent verdict, like something that would be on your record forever. I sat in my room that evening and did not come down for dinner, and she did not make me. She came up instead, sometime after 8, and sat on the edge of my bed. She did not say anything helpful or instructional or wise. She did not tell me to study harder or to ask for a tutor or that Pamela had never had trouble with math. She just sat there for a moment, and then she said, quietly, "You are smarter than you think you are." She said it once, then she stood up and left. She did not make a production of it. She did not check in the next day about the test. But she said it, and I heard it. And that version of her was real too. I have held that version of her in the same hand as everything else, and I have tried to keep the grip even. I met my husband Marcus at a project management conference in Atlanta in 2006. We were both 26. I had been out of school for 4 years and had been at my firm for 3. I was there to earn a continuing education credit for my certification. He was there because his company had sent him, and he had decided, he told me later, to actually pay attention rather than sit in the back row and check his email. I noticed him because he asked a question during a breakout session that was sharper than the question the presenter had prepared for. The presenter paused for just a second too long before answering, and you could see him recalibrating. I remember thinking, whoever that man is, he pays attention. He does not accept the version of a thing that was prepared in advance. He finds the edge and presses on it, not to be difficult, but because that is how he understands things. We talked for 45 minutes over bad conference coffee during the lunch break. He asked me what I actually did. Not my job title, but what I actually did on a given Tuesday. Nobody had ever asked me that before. I told him about the logistics project I was managing, a warehouse optimization that had been stalled for 8 months before I took it over. He asked 3 follow-up questions. Good ones. I did not expect him to call. He called 4 days later. We dated for 2 years. He was patient and specific, and never performed emotion he did not feel, which I found, after a lifetime of people performing emotion at the appropriate moments, almost disorienting. He met my mother at Thanksgiving the first year we were together, and she was polite to him the way she was polite to service staff at restaurants. Technically correct, attentive enough not to be rude, but calibrated to communicate that her full regard was elsewhere. She asked him one question the entire evening, what he did for work. And when he told her he was in supply chain optimization, she nodded and turned to refill someone's water glass. My father was already gone by then. Pamela was at law school and did not make it home that year, and my mother spent half of dinner talking about where Pamela was clerking that summer and whether the firm had any name recognition in Atlanta. Marcus noticed. He did not say anything at dinner. He said something later, in the car on the way home, quietly, without looking away from the road. He said, "She did not ask me a single question. Not as a complaint, as an observation, the way a doctor states a finding." That is the thing about Marcus. He does not editorialize. He names the thing clearly, and then he sets it down and waits to see what you do with it. In 12 years of marriage, I have never once heard him catastrophize. I have also never once heard him minimize. He occupies some precise middle ground that I have spent a long time trying to understand, and have come to believe is just who he is. We got married in 2009. Small ceremony, 30 people, a tent in his aunt's backyard in Decatur, string lights, a caterer my coworker recommended who made jerk chicken and plantains and a coconut cake that people still mention. It was a Tuesday in May because the Saturday rate at any venue we looked at was $600 more, and we were saving for a house. I wore a cream dress I found at a sample sale. Marcus wore a blue suit he already owned. We wrote our own vows at the kitchen table the Sunday before, and neither of us cried while we read them, which we had agreed on. But Marcus's voice changed on the last line of his, and I will keep that to myself. I was happy that day. Fully, quietly happy. The kind of happy that does not need anyone else to confirm it. My mother did not attend. She sent a card 2 days after the wedding. The card said, "Wishing you all the best in your new life." She signed it Gloria. Not Mom. Gloria. I kept the card. I did not plan to. I read it, slid it back into the envelope, and put the envelope in the drawer of my nightstand. When we moved the following year, I put it in a box, and the box came with us to the new house. And that card is the first item in what eventually became a very different kind of record. The call that changed the direction of everything came on a Thursday afternoon in October of 2014. I was at my desk. I was a senior project manager at a logistics firm by then, 8 years in, managing a team of 11, running 3 concurrent projects. The call came from a number I recognized but had not saved in my phone because we had not spoken in almost a year. It was Pamela. She told me our mother had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure, stage 2. The cardiologist was optimistic, she said. Manageable, they said, with the right medication regimen and lifestyle adjustments and regular monitoring. But the monitoring required appointments. The lifestyle adjustments required oversight. The medication regimen required someone who would make sure it was followed, someone present, someone available. Then she said the thing I have thought about nearly every day since. She said, "I am in the middle of partnership track, Denise. I cannot walk away from that right now. You are the one who has more flexibility." I want you to understand what she was describing as flexibility. I had a full-time job, a mortgage, and a husband. What I did not have was a child, which I think is what she meant. In her calculation, I was less deployed, more available, more expendable. She was not wrong that I had more geographic flexibility. I was 90 minutes from Handington. She was in Nashville. What she did not acknowledge, and what I did not say out loud, was that geographic flexibility and professional sacrifice are not the same thing. That someone was going to lose something either way, and she had already decided who. I did not argue. I did not ask her to reconsider. I asked her one question. I said, "Does Mama know we're having this conversation?" Pamela said, "She knows she needs help." That was the whole conversation. 11 minutes. I know because my call log still shows it. I have never deleted it. I talked to Marcus that night for a long time. We sat at the kitchen table after dinner and I laid out what Pamela had said and what it would mean. He did not tell me what to do. He has never told me what to do. He said, Whatever you decide, I will make it work with you. But I need you to decide with your eyes open. Then he said, and I need you to know that whatever you give to this, I will not resent you for it. But I also need you to know that I will notice if you give everything and they give nothing. I will notice, even if you tell yourself not to. That was the most important thing anyone said to me in any of this. He saw it before it happened. He named it before I could. I gave notice at my job 6 weeks later. I negotiated a contract position with a smaller firm that paid less and demanded less, so I could be available during business hours. I moved our base of operations, not all the way to Haddington, but to a town 22 miles away, so I could reach my mother in under 30 minutes on any given day. And on the first morning I drove over to set up her medications into the weekly pill organizer, a Monday in December, I took out a yellow legal pad from the bag I had brought with me, and I wrote down what I did and when I did it and how long it took. I do not know entirely why I did it, some professional instinct, some part of me that understood even then that this was a project with a scope and a timeline and deliverables, and that I did not know how to enter a project without documenting it. I labeled the page: date, tasks, time in, time out, hours, miles. That was the first page of what became the first binder. The first year was the year of calibration. My mother did not ask for help graciously. She did not ask for help at all, technically. She accepted it the way she accepted most services, as her due, without comment or gratitude, the same way she accepted that the mail would arrive and the utilities would run. I was the utility. I showed up and I functioned, and she did not think about what it cost to keep me running. I drove her to the cardiologist in Macon on the third Tuesday of every month. The drive was 40 minutes each way. The appointment was never less than 90 minutes because she asked thorough questions and required thorough answers, and I was glad for that because thorough questions meant she was engaged in her own care, which made my job easier. I managed her pharmacy situation, which was genuinely complex. She had Medicare, a supplemental policy, and a separate prescription plan, and each of them covered a different slice of the same reality and disagreed with each other regularly. I spent, in that first year alone, approximately 60 hours on the phone with insurance representatives. I logged every call: date, representative name, call duration, outcome. I organized her mail and paid her utilities on autopay after she accidentally let the electric bill lapse 2 months in a row. I hired a cleaning service that came on Fridays so that the house was presentable for anyone who might visit. Because to my mother, a presentable house was not cosmetic. It was moral. A clean house was a house that had its dignity. I understood that. I kept the house clean. Pamela called on Sundays, usually. Sometimes on Tuesday evenings if something had come to mind that she wanted to share. She sent gifts for birthdays and holidays, always appropriate, always on time, always with a card that my mother read aloud at the dinner table, if I happened to be there when it arrived. My mother kept Pamela's gifts on the mantel in the living room, and in the center of the kitchen table. Mine were in the closet off the kitchen. I noticed. I wrote it down. Not in the binder. Just in myself. Item 4, October 22. Cardiology appointment, Dr. Bautista. 2 hours, 14 minutes total. 80 miles round trip. Prescription adjustment. Increased furosemide dosage. Side effects discussed. Explained changes to patient, in plain language, twice. In the second year, the medications changed 3 times. Her sodium was low in February, then her potassium in June, then both simultaneously in September, which required a hospitalization scare that turned out not to be a hospitalization, but cost me 3 days of contracted work hours while we waited to be sure. I learned more about electrolyte management in that year than I ever expected to carry in my head. I knew her lab values the way I knew the square footage of my own house. I missed Marcus more than I said. He drove out to Haddington on weekends and sat with my mother on the porch and let her talk, which he did with a patience I could not always locate in myself after a week of managing her moods alongside her medications. She liked Marcus more in those years, I believe, than she ever said directly. She called him by his name. Not your husband, not him. Marcus. From her, that was warmth. At Christmas, Pamela came home for 4 days. She arrived on the 23rd with luggage and wine and a wreath she had ordered from a shop in Nashville, and she took over the kitchen on Christmas Eve with a certainty that suggested she had been managing everything all year, that she was the architect of this household, and she had simply been away. My mother lit up. The favorite daughter was home, and everything was correct again, and I sat in the living room and watched my mother look at Pamela the way she had always looked at Pamela, like someone watching a stage performance they had paid good money for, delighted and proprietary and proud. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say that I had not already understood for 40 years. Item 18. December 25. Pamela home for Christmas. I am noted in my mother's card to Pamela, which I saw because my mother left it on the counter open, as the one holding down the fort. Not by name. The one. The 3rd year was the hardest, and the hardest part of it came in September. My mother had a hospitalization, 4 nights at Piedmont Medical Center, a fluid retention event that the cardiologist later said could have been caught earlier if the primary care office had returned my call on a Friday afternoon rather than waiting until Monday morning to follow up. It could not be caught on a Friday because no one returned the call on a Friday. That is not a complaint. It is a fact I documented. I sat in the hospital room with her for 3 of those 4 nights. I slept in the chair that reclined halfway and stopped. I brought my laptop and my contract work, and I worked in 2-hour increments when she was sleeping. I called Marcus. I called her cardiologist. I called the hospital case manager to discuss the discharge plan before the discharge happened rather than after, because in my experience, discharge plans discussed after the fact are not plans. They are instructions handed to someone who is already exhausted. I did not call Pamela until the 2nd day because I knew what Pamela would say, and I did not have the bandwidth to manage her response alongside everything else that needed managing. When Pamela arrived on day 3, she walked into the room and looked around it the way people look at hotel rooms, assessing the quality of the accommodation, and she said, "Why didn't they give her a private room?" I had spent 48 hours in that room with a woman connected to monitors, sleeping in a chair that stopped reclining halfway. The first question was about the room. I said, "Private rooms require a physician order, and hers hadn't been written yet." I said it in the same voice I use on project calls when someone asks a question that reveals they have not read the brief. Flat, informational, moving on. Pamela nodded and went to hold my mother's hand, and my mother smiled at her, that particular smile, and said, "There she is." Item 31. September 14. Hospitalization. Piedmont Medical. 4 nights. Fluid retention event. Personal hours logged, 68. Pamela arrived day 3, departed day 4. She signed the discharge paperwork as next of kin because she was present when the discharge coordinator came through, and I was at the pharmacy picking up the new prescriptions. Her signature is on the document. My name appears nowhere on it. I held that one up to the light for a long time. In the 4th year, Marcus and I started talking seriously about having a child. We had circled it for a while, talking around it rather than at it. Year 4, we talked directly at it. We tried. We did not get pregnant that year, and the weight of that lived in my body while I was also carrying everything else. And I want to tell you that I did not let it affect the quality of care I gave my mother, because I did not. But I want you to know it was there. My aunt, my father's sister, Aunt Cora, came through town that spring. She was 78 then, lived in Nashville, and drove herself down, alone, with a trunk full of food she had cooked over the previous 3 days. Collard greens and cornbread and a sweet potato pie and a pot of beef stew that lasted my mother 4 meals. She stayed for 5 days. She sat with my mother during the daytime while I worked my contracted hours from home in the back bedroom. She called me each evening at 7 to give me a report on the day. medications taken at the correct times, appetite fair, better at lunch than dinner, mood variable. 2 complaints about the neighbor's dog, which was ongoing and not medical. She was precise. She was more precise than some of the home health aides I would hire later. Before she left, she gave me the yellow legal pad she had been keeping her notes on. 5 days of observations in her careful handwriting, dates and times and specifics. She handed it to me at the door, and she held both my hands in hers for a moment, and she said, "You are doing a good thing. I see it, even if nobody else is saying it." That is the thing about Aunt Cora. She does not say things to soften moments. She says things because she has assessed the situation and determined they are true. That was her assessment. She delivered it, and she got in her car and drove back to Nashville. Item 44. Aunt Cora's visit. April 3 through 7. 5 days. Notes attached, in her handwriting. Filed at the back of binder 4. In the 5th year, my mother's condition stabilized, and then gradually, the way gradual always happens, not all at once, but in increments small enough that you adjust to each one before the next arrives, it began to require more. She could no longer drive after her license was not renewed following a vision evaluation in February. She could not stand at the stove for more than 20 minutes before the fatigue required her to sit. I arranged a meal service 3 days a week and supplemented it with food I brought on the other days. I arranged a part-time home health aide, a woman named Patricia, who came 3 mornings a week and was warm and capable, and whose presence I was grateful for in a way I have not fully expressed to anyone. I arranged a medical alert system that my mother initially refused with some force, and then, after she fell reaching for something on the high shelf in the hall closet and lay on the floor for 20 minutes before she could get herself upright, agreed to wear. It was in the 5th year that I started receiving LinkedIn notifications. Pamela viewed my profile on a Tuesday, then again 3 days later on a Friday. Then, the following week, an account I recognized, a woman who was listed as an associate at Pamela's firm, viewed it also. They did not connect with me. They did not message me. They looked and they left. The way you look at something you are trying to understand without letting it know you are looking. I do not know exactly what prompted it. A question from my mother, perhaps, about what I had been doing before all of this. A conversation at a dinner table I was not present at. Something. Item 52. February 2019. LinkedIn profile views. Pamela Okafor, partner, Whitmore Callahan, Tuesday and Friday of the same week. Secondary view from affiliated account, associate at same firm. No contact initiated. I noted it, I filed it, I moved on. I was not building a case. I want to be very clear about that. I was not plotting, I was not rehearsing a confrontation or preparing a document for some future reckoning I had already planned. I was doing what I had always done. I was documenting a project. That was all it ever was. The following month, something happened that I have thought about more than anything else from those 6 years. More than the hospital nights, more than the insurance calls, more than the Christmas with the wreath. I had driven to my mother's house on a Wednesday to bring groceries and sit with her for the afternoon. Patricia had the day off. I let myself in with my key, which I had held since the first month, and I found my mother in the living room asleep in her chair, with her phone on the cushion beside her. The screen was still lit. She must have fallen asleep mid-conversation, or mid-reading. I did not mean to see it. I was reaching past her to adjust the throw blanket that had slid off her lap, and I saw the screen before it went dark. It was a text thread, Pamela's name at the top, and the last message, the one my mother had apparently been reading when she fell asleep, was a long one. I read the first 3 lines before the screen went dark. I am paraphrasing because I will not pretend I memorized it word for word, but the substance was this. Pamela was asking my mother whether she had spoken to the attorney recently, whether the will was in order, and whether my mother had thought about what she wanted to do about the house specifically. She wrote that she wanted to make sure everything was set up correctly because Denise is in a different situation than we are, and we should be thoughtful about what makes sense going forward. Denise is in a different situation than we are. I stood next to my mother's chair for a moment. I did not wake her. I went to the kitchen and I sat at the table, and I sat there for several minutes. My hands were not shaking from anger. They were shaking from something that felt more like clarity, the particular physical sensation of understanding something you already knew but had been refusing to name. I took out my phone and I made a note of what I had seen and when I had seen it. I did not take a photograph of the screen. I could not. But I wrote down the date and the time and what I had read in as close to exact language as I could reconstruct. Item 57, March 2019. Text thread observed on mother's phone, inadvertently. Pamela Okafor to Gloria Hadley. Subject, estate planning. House. The phrase, Denise is in a different situation than we are. Time observed approximately 2:15 p.m. Screen went dark before full text was visible. Contents partially reconstructed from memory. I drove home that evening and I told Marcus what I had seen. He listened to all of it. Then he said, okay. Just that. Okay. The way he says it when he has heard something that requires him to take a moment before he responds. He was quiet for a little while, and then he said, keep doing what you're doing. Don't change anything. Just keep documenting. That is the advice I followed. The 6th year was the final year, and I will not dramatize it because it did not need dramatizing. My mother's decline was not sudden. It was the kind of decline that moves like water finding its level, slowly and then all at once, and you adjust to each stage before you can fully absorb it. First, the short-term memory, which went in patches at first and then more consistently, so that she would ask me the same question twice in 20 minutes and not know she had asked it the first time. Then the fatigue that made the walk from the bedroom to the kitchen a journey that required planning. Then the appetite. Then, finally, the recognition that we were no longer in the management phase, but in a different phase, one with a different name. I hired a second aide to cover afternoons. I converted her dining room into a sitting room so she did not have to navigate the hallway to reach the television. I had 2 conversations with her cardiologist about what was coming, and one with a palliative care coordinator who was precise and gentle and answered every question I had. And I had written all of them down in advance on an index card because I knew I would not remember them in the room. I translated all of those conversations into plain language for my mother on a Sunday afternoon in November, when she was rested and alert and her eyes were clear. I sat next to her on the sofa, and I told her what the doctors had told me, in the same language I had used to explain things to her throughout the 6 years, careful and plain, and not softened to the point of being meaningless. She listened. She asked one question. She said, "Will it hurt?" I said, "They are going to make sure it doesn't." She nodded. She reached over and she held my hand. She held it for 12 seconds. I know because I counted. Not because I was clinical about it, but because I needed to know how long that version of her could stay. The version that held my hand. The version that sat on the edge of my bed at 14 and said, "You are smarter than you think you are." She died in March of 2021. At home, which was what she had asked for. I was there. Pamela had flown in 2 days before and was in the guest room down the hall. Pamela was present. I am glad she was there. Whatever else is true, I am glad my mother did not die with only the aide in the house and the sound of monitors. I drove home afterward. Marcus was waiting. I sat down at the kitchen table and told him, and he stood up and put his arms around me, and we stood in the kitchen for a long time without talking. I did not need words from him. I have never needed words from him in the moments when words would be insufficient anyway. I did not cry until the following Tuesday. But when I started, I could not stop for a while. And Marcus sat down on the floor of the bathroom with his back against the wall and his arms around his knees, and he just stayed there. He stayed there the whole time. He did not tell me it was going to be okay, or that she was in a better place, or that I had done everything I could. He just stayed there. Item 73. March 14, 2021. End of care. 2,190 days. Total documented hours, 14,360. Total documented miles, 41,200. Total out-of-pocket unreimbursed expenses, $22,418. 73 binders. All labeled, all dated, all in the storage room off the garage, behind the holiday bins, behind the tax files, in the exact order in which they were filled. If you have ever done the invisible work, the work that nobody tallies and nobody thanks you for, the work that you did not because anyone asked you to, but because it needed doing, and you were the one who could, drop a comment. Tell me, because I think more of us carry this than we ever say. And while you are here, subscribe to Reckoning episodes if you have not yet. The will reading was scheduled for 11 days after my mother's death. I had not slept well in those 11 days, but I had slept. Marcus drove me to the attorney's office and waited in the parking lot. I had told him he did not need to come in. He came to the parking lot anyway. The conference room was beige. The carpet was the color of old oatmeal. Pamela was already there when I arrived, 8 minutes early, which I noted because I am always early, and I had never known Pamela to be early for anything. She had a leather portfolio open in front of her with a pen laid across it at a precise angle. We did not hug. We said each other's names. The attorney was named Gerald Ames. He had a soft voice and the careful, practiced manner of a man who had conducted many readings of many wills for many families who were beneath the surface, not getting along. He was good at his job. He offered water from the ceramic pitcher that no one touched. He read for 14 minutes. I watched the clock on the wall the entire time. The house, the savings accounts. A brokerage account with a balance, he stated plainly. The jewelry, itemized. The furniture, the car, all of it to Pamela, described in the will as my daughter Pamela Ann Okafor, who has brought me such pride and who will carry forward this family with grace. To me, the pearl earrings my mother wore every Sunday to First Baptist, and a note, handwritten, in a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in her handwriting. Gerald Ames read the note aloud because it was incorporated into the will. Denise was always so capable. She will be fine. Will be, future tense, as if she were writing a recommendation for someone she was sending out into the world, confident they would manage, because they always had. Pamela's pen made a small sound against the portfolio. I do not know what she was writing. Gerald Ames slid the envelope across the table to me. He had a look on his face that I have seen in hospital rooms, a look that wants to acknowledge something it cannot name, a look that knows the limits of the role it occupies. He was professional, and I do not blame him for anything. I put the envelope in my bag. I looked at the clock, 11:42 in the morning. I thanked Gerald Ames. I said goodbye to Pamela. I walked to the parking lot and got in the car, and Marcus looked at me and I told him in one sentence what had happened. He put the car in reverse and drove us home, and did not say anything until I asked him to. At the kitchen table, I told him all of it. The 14 minutes, the future tense, the pen. He did not react the way I expected. He did not get angry. He got very still, which in Marcus is more significant than anger. And then he said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" That is the correct question. It has always been the correct question. I said, "I want to call an attorney." I retained an estate attorney named Vivian Osei 3 weeks after the reading. I found her through a referral from a colleague who had gone through a different kind of estate dispute 2 years earlier. Vivian had a small office and a direct manner, and she did not waste my time or hers. I brought her the binders. Not all 73. A representative selection, years 1 through 3 and year 6, plus the financial summary I had prepared. The total hours, the total miles, the out-of-pocket expenses. She reviewed them over 2 weeks. She called me on a Friday afternoon when I was sitting in the backyard and said, "I want to ask you something. Did you know you had a potential claim for compensation as a family caregiver?" I did not know that. I did not know that in some circumstances, when caregiving is sustained and documented and quantifiable, and when no formal compensation agreement was made, a claim for equitable compensation against an estate is possible. It is not automatic. It is not simple. It depends on the state, on the documentation, on the duration and nature of the care, and on whether there was an expectation of compensation, explicit or implied. I had not formalized anything. I had no written agreement. But I had documented everything, 14,360 hours over 6 years, at a level of specificity that Vivian told me, without elaborating, she had not seen before from a non-professional. She filed a petition on my behalf, a claim for equitable compensation for caregiving services provided to the estate over 6 years. The figure she calculated, based on licensed home health aid rates in Georgia for comparable services, was $214,000. Not the full value of the estate, not the house or the accounts. A specific, documentable number representing the value of specific, documented work. Pamela's attorney contacted Vivian within 72 hours of the filing. The negotiation took 4 months. I will not walk through all of it. It was not pleasant, and it was not clean. And there were moments when I questioned whether the cost of it, not the financial cost, but the other costs, was worth what I was doing. I want to be honest about those moments because I think they are real, and I think anyone who tells you they had no doubt in a process like this is either not being accurate or was in a different situation than I was. What I will tell you is this. At one point, Pamela's attorney submitted a written argument that my documentation was excessive and therefore suspect, that no reasonable person maintained records at this level of detail unless they had anticipated a dispute, that the documentation itself suggested premeditation. Vivian's written response was 14 pages. The relevant sentence read, "No reasonable person provides 14,360 hours of sustained care to a family member without compensation and without formal agreement, and then calls that care love, while another party receives an estate valued at substantially more than the documented care costs and calls that arrangement fair." We settled. I agreed to a non-disclosure on the specific number, and I will honor that agreement. What I will say is that the number was right. It reflected the work. Not all of it, because not all of it could be reflected in a number, but enough of it. Near the end of the 4 months, on a Thursday evening, Pamela called me directly. Not her attorney. Her. I was in the kitchen. I looked at the screen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. She said, "I want to understand why you did this." I said, "Which part?" She said, "All of it. The records, the petition. You did not have to do any of this." I said, "Pamela, I spent 6 years documenting a project because that is what I know how to do. I did not file the petition to punish you. I did not file it because I was angry, though I was. I filed it because the work was real, and it had a value, and no one in this family ever assigned it one. Someone needed to." There was a silence, a long one. I had learned, over the years, to let Pamela's silences run without filling them. She said, "Mama thought you were doing it because you wanted to, because you chose to." I said, "I was doing it because I wanted to. I made a choice. That does not mean the choice was free." Another silence. Then she said, "I should have come more." 4 words. No apology technically embedded in them, but I know my sister. I know what it costs her to say something that admits a failure without framing it as a circumstance. That sentence came from somewhere real. It was not performed. She is a very good performer, and that was not performed. I said, "Yes, you should have." We did not say anything after that for a moment. She said she needed to go. I said, "Okay." She hung up. I stood at the kitchen counter. Marcus came in from the other room and put his hand on my shoulder without asking what had happened. He had heard enough of it to know. He stood there with his hand on my shoulder until I moved, and then he went to the stove and started making dinner, and I sat at the counter and watched him, and that was enough. If someone in your life only showed up after the math changed, I need to hear that story. Drop it in the comments. And if this story reminded you that your work has a value, even when no one in the room puts a number on it, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. Subscribe to Reckoning episodes so you never miss a story like this. 6 weeks after the settlement, Aunt Cora called me. Not on a weekend, on a Wednesday morning while I was at my desk, back in a full-time role for the first time in 6 years, a director position at a different firm, one that had approached me 6 months earlier and been patient while I worked through everything else. I had started 2 weeks prior. I was sitting at my desk with a coffee that had gone cold, and I was reading through a project brief when Aunt Cora called. She did not ask about the settlement. She does not discuss money unless it is necessary. She asked how I was sleeping. I said, better. I told her the truth, which I am not always good at when someone asks that question. But Aunt Cora has a way of asking it that makes evasion feel more trouble than it's worth. She said, "Your daddy would have been proud of you. Not of the money, of how you carried yourself through all of it." She meant the 6 years. She meant the settlement. She meant the whole thing, the way she meant things when she said them, completely and without reservation. That was the acknowledgement I had been waiting for, not from Pamela, not from the outcome, but from someone who knew the whole story and had no stake in how I felt about it. My aunt did not owe me that sentence. She had done nothing wrong. She drove from Nashville with a trunk full of food and kept her own notes and handed them to me when she left. She was already a better family member than most people in this story. But she said it anyway, on behalf of all of it, on behalf of the card signed Gloria and the Christmas with the wreath and the discharge paperwork with the wrong name on it. And I received it. I believe her. I believe that he would have. Believing that and trusting that the larger family will be different going forward are two different things, and I am not naive about which one I can control. We start slow. Pamela sent a text 3 weeks after Aunt Cora called. I had not heard from her since the Thursday evening phone call. The text was 4 words. "I am going to therapy." I read it. I put my phone down on the desk. I looked at the project brief. I did not reply. Some messages are their own answer. I still have the 73 binders. They are in the storage room off our garage, stacked on the metal shelves behind the holiday bins and behind the tax files from the years I was on contract. I have not opened any of them since the settlement was finalized. I do not think I need to, but I have not thrown them away either. I do not know that I will. They represent something that I am not ready to put in the recycling bin, and that I am not sure belongs in the recycling bin. Maybe someday. Not yet. The pearl earrings are in a small ceramic dish on my dresser, next to a photo of Marcus and me from a trip we took 2 years ago. I wore the earrings once, to my first day at the new position. I cannot fully explain why. Something in me needed to wear them. Not for her exactly. Not as a performance of grief or of forgiveness or of anything she would have recognized. For the 12 seconds in the living room on that Sunday afternoon when she held my hand, and I counted. For the version of her that was real, and that I held in the same hand as everything else, and tried to keep the grip even. Here is what I want to say to you, directly, to whoever this story found today, and whatever it reminded you of. Family is not the people who say they love you at holidays. Family is not the people who sign paperwork while you are at the pharmacy. Family is not the people whose name is in the will, or the people whose acceptance letter gets framed, or the people whose absence everyone protects by never naming it. Aunt Cora drove from Nashville with a car full of food she had cooked for 3 days. She sat in that house for 5 days and called me every evening with a report, and kept her own notes on a yellow legal pad and handed them to me before she left. That is family. Marcus, who sat on the bathroom floor and did not say a word, who came to the parking lot of the attorney's office because he knew I would need him nearby, even if I told him I didn't. That is family. The people who show up, not when you need something from them, but when you need something, period. Who stay, who document their own presence by being present. Your work has a value. The invisible work, the work nobody tallies, the work you do at 5 a.m. and on the phone with insurance representatives and in hospital chairs that recline halfway. It has a value. You are allowed to know that. You are allowed to document it. That is my story. 6 years, 73 binders, 1 pair of pearl earrings in a dish on my dresser. Drop a comment, subscribe to Reckoning episodes, and I will see you in the next one.